I think that's the kind of stuff that matters the most is like, yeah, if you are all about like that side of the sport, like I love competing with my teammates. I love competing with myself. I love the grind. I love thinking about how I can add more training. I love thinking about how I can be better at some element of my stroke. Like if that's the kind of stuff that gets you excited, the racing and the results and the satisfaction that comes from that will flow from that, right? You know, if you start thinking ahead and saying like, oh, I love rowing because I love beating people. I love winning, right? Like that's an end result of you got to love the training to do that.
Other than that, any last questions for me?
Nope, all good.
Cool. All right, well, let's dive in. For everyone listening, we have Coach Jason Elefant here, who is the assistant coach for the Princeton Heavyweight Rowing Program. He's actually at the boathouse now. I've had a chance to tour that boathouse. It's unbelievable, and I'm excited to dive into more with Princeton and Jason's career as a coach of many different programs and his background as someone who really probably knows, especially in, I think, Jason, one of the things that I think is super fascinating about you, and again, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and kick off some of that, but like your background since your career as a member of the Princeton Lightweights, like your coaching background has been, your involvement with many successful programs is something truly that I think is worth diving into and learning a little bit more about you and what you've learned through that process. But with that, let's kick things off. You're at the boathouse, Jason. Give us a little bit of your introduction, how you got into coaching, and then also transition that into what's cooking at Princeton right now. I know on Instagram we've been able to see where the team's been getting your first strokes out on the water. I think you guys wrapped up a winter camp in Tampa, if I'm not mistaken, a few weeks ago. So now it's like probably starting to feel like spring rowing is upon us now that the temperatures are hopefully starting to be a little bit more mild. But give us the scoop. Start with a little bit of your introduction and then dive into what's currently happening while you're sitting there in the boathouse.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Kevin. This is it's my second year on the coaching staff at Princeton, but in a lot of ways, it feels like I've been here a lot longer. So I started rowing at the Hun School, which is a small private school here in Princeton. And then I rowed there for 4 years and then just moved down the street here to the university where I rowed for the lightweight team for 4 years. So really, I kind of consider myself a New Jersey guy. I was actually born in Philly, got family down there in the Northeast. So I'm a very big Philly sports fan and still kind of on a high from the Eagles a couple weeks back.
Yeah, okay. That kicks us off on the right. Yeah, there we go. Okay, very cool.
So I consider myself, New Jersey guy with Philly roots. But yeah, basically spent, most of my life in this region here. And then, after I finished rowing at Princeton, I kind of needed to get as far away as possible from just this area. So I got a coaching fellowship over in the UK at St. Paul's School. And so I actually didn't know anything about the program at St. Paul's at the time, and just really wanted to do something different and live somewhere new. And then it turned out that I was actually walking into a really good situation over there with Bobby Thatcher and a team that's won Henley 3 times in the last 10 years. So I got to learn a ton from over there. And then as I got to the end of my I did that fellowship for 2 years over in the UK. And as I got to the end of those 2 years, I realized, the part of the fellowship that I loved the most was actually the coaching side, not so much the teaching side. And so I came back to the U.S. and, wanted to get involved in sort of the Division I level and coaching here at the college scene in America. So my first foray into college coaching was up at Syracuse, and I got hired on there by Dave Reichman, who hired a guy who had no real coaching experience other than just a couple of years with a high school program. But he took a chance on me up there, and ended up sticking it out for 5 years there after kind of going up and thinking, this will just be something good to put on the resume, and ended up actually loving it. And we made so many great strides up there as a program that spent 5 years there, but very transformative and very helpful in my career. when I got there, I think, the team had sort of been, sort of bouncing around in the C final, had, even won D final, and then started to make some progress up into the B finals. And then by the time I left, we'd made it to 2 straight A finals at the IRA. And, Syracuse has actually still only been in the A final over the last 4 or 5 years, I believe. So that's kind of a fun thing that I got to be a part of while I was up there for 5 years. And then after my last year at Syracuse, I moved out to the West Coast, and I got an awesome opportunity to work at Cal. And coming into the program that year, that was the summer of 22. Cal had just come off a national championship in the Varsity 8, which was their first their first one since 2016, actually. So that was a pretty high water mark for their program in that time. And then got a chance to work with some awesome coaches there, some really incredible athletes. And we actually ended up finishing that year, not only repeating as national champions, but sweeping the IRA, winning the 1, 2, and 3V, and also the Varsity 4. So that was actually, the first time Cal had ever swept the IRA. So that was, pretty cool to, again, be part of a really high watermark for a program, even one that's as old and sort of successful as Cal. It was pretty special to be able to do something that had not been done before. So that was really awesome. I loved living out on the West Coast. I met my future wife there. My fiance works in the track and field coaching staff out at Cal. And then I got kind of an offer I couldn't refuse, which was coming back home to Princeton. And so that summer I finally, made my way back to New Jersey after spending, 7 or 8 years kind of traveling around the world and coaching in all different places. But landed back at Princeton in the summer of 23 and have just been absolutely loving being back. Like I can't really express how much joy I get, like coming into this building for work every day, just knowing where it sort of holds a spot in my, my rowing background, sort of my, emotional highs and lows as an athlete here, like just getting a chance to come back here. And, I have to pinch myself sometimes. I'm like, man, I get to work here now. So, and then, last year we had, such an awesome season with our team. We made, some really big strides with the depth of the squad. We won the Row Cup at the Eastern Sprints, which was the first time in almost 10 years. Varsity ended up winning the Henley. The ladies played over at Henley, 2V and 3V, won the Eastern Sprints and second at IRA. So we were really pumped with just the progress that we made as a team last year. And then, now in my second year as a coach in the program, now the job is just, hey, how can we keep pushing the program forward? And, Princeton's a really historic and successful program, but there's always new heights to be achieved. So, our goal right now this year is, last year was awesome, but we're focused on the 2025 group. We've got a whole new set of guys, whole new set of, challenges. And, I think we're excited to attack this coming season and sort of see how that unfolds.
And you guys literally just got on the water, this week, right? Like first, I think we were chatting a little bit before, but there's the canal that, a 1 lane, kind of opportunity to kind of get out and stuff like that. And I guess, so like literally first strokes back in New Jersey, obviously, right? Not including, being, your training camp in Tampa, but what's that been like, right? Like the first week, right? Here we are kind of, deeper half of the week. What's like the first couple strokes been? Where's the energy for the team? How are the guys feeling? Obviously we've had a beautiful week weather-wise after a January and February that were quite brutal temperatures-wise, as you know from the ice currently on the lake right now. But yeah, talk about those first couple days.
Yeah, well, it's definitely been, like you mentioned, it's been a little bit more of a winter this year than we've had in recent times. I think, for us, this has probably been the first time we've had significant ice on Lake Carnegie in about 10 years. We'll get ice events every now and then, but, this is the first time that we've actually been unable to row in February for quite some time. And so, it's really no big deal. I think, when I was at Princeton, half the years we rode in February, half the years we were iced in through to March. And I don't think you can point to any one year as, hey, the amount of water time doesn't have a direct correlation on your results. It's just how you spend that time. And with a little bit more time indoors, it's just a great opportunity to keep building the engine on the ergs, keep on top of your individual fitness. It allows us to kind of work with guys individually a little bit more technically as well. So, we see no real difference between, hey, if we get out on the water in February, like that's awesome. We're still going to probably row the erg a couple times a week, probably more than a couple times, even in February. It just so happens that this year we've been doing most of the work, purely on land to this point. But yeah, we are actually able to get out on the water on Monday this week, but not on the lake. So sort of as you were alluding to, we've been rowing on this canal. So parallel to Lake Carnegie runs the Delaware and Raritan Canal, which connects the Delaware River inland out to the Raritan Bay, which is up near Rutgers, and that goes out to the Atlantic. And this canal has been around since, early 1800s. And it's actually where Princeton crews rode when the program got started in the 1870s. And so for about 30 or 40 years, it's just exclusively what Princeton did was row on the canal. And you actually back then shared the canal with a lot of like commercial barge traffic. So it eventually got to be a little bit of a pain. So somebody got in the ear of Andrew Carnegie in the early 1900s and sort of convinced him to put his philanthropy to work and build us a lake. So pretty nuts when you think about it, that, one man can just kind of snap his fingers and build a lake. Definitely wouldn't happen in this day and age, but that's how we got Lake Carnegie. And we're, super fortunate. It's the best body of water in the world. So I think, for us now, like getting on the canal, it's kind of a throwback to those old days, which is kind of fun for the guys just to do something that hasn't been done in a while. Greg used to take some boats out there, in the early winter or sort of early spring, late winter, but we really haven't had to do it for 10 to 15 years, just because we've had some pretty mild winters. So this is the first time we've done it in a long time, and I think all the guys are like pretty pumped about it because, they get to trade the erg for some on-water rowing, which is always welcome at this stage of the winter. And B, it's kind of unique. We're walking the boats across the bridge, so you're kind of crossing traffic and dropping them in this tiny little dock over on the canal. It's only wide enough for 1/8, so you kind of launch, you row down to the end as far as you can go. You turn around and everyone kind of turns in order and then goes back the other way. So it is a little bit funky, but it is kind of fun just to get back on the water and just break up a little bit of the training routine as we start to look forward to some actual consistent water in the spring. And I think a lot of the rowing that we're doing right now is just, hey, just get back on the water, take strokes. The nature of the canal is that you're just going to row continuously pretty much, so we'll do a little bit of drilling to warm up, and then we're just getting some longer shots in, kind of the same thing that we'd be doing on the ergs, right? Like 5 by 15 minutes or 4 by 20 minutes or something like that. Just getting that mileage in the water as a change.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think, and that's one of the things with, and you probably know this from, kind of Syracuse versus Princeton, kind of being up in New York versus being, kind of, again, I'm in Philadelphia, so like closer, kind of to, a little bit more south. And, the winters are probably a little bit different in terms of like when you can kind of get out, one versus the other. Like it's a little bit, especially here in Philly, like back when I was coaching, and like we were always getting out in February, right? Today, this winter is obviously one that's a little bit more, unkind with its temperatures, and I know the river here, the Schuylkill's been frozen over for a while now. People are getting out, which is exciting. But with that, I want to mention, or I wanted to bring up, like we'll dive into a couple of really fun topics talking about coaching, recruiting, and just being an athlete at that level. But before we get to that, like when you were an athlete at Princeton and decided to go, to St. Paul's overseas, did you expect your trajectory as a coach to look like, top 10 perennial, really, really solid Division I program in Syracuse to national champion, program at Cal to, perennial, contender for medals, if not, right, hopefully, kind of this year, right, bring it all. Like, did you expect your trajectory to look like that, where it's like your 10-ish years of kind of professional coaching experience has been, the majority of it has been, as a member of very, very elite programs? Like, what's that been like? Like, what's that exposure been to or been for you, in terms of just what it's taught you as a coach, being around those kinds of athletes and those amazing coaches who have obviously, built those successful programs. What's that experience been like? I think that's a unique experience where you didn't have that like long stint of, teaching high school novices how to carry boats and the drag of all that. Like, like I'm no different. I started coaching college, 1 year after coaching high school, but not at that level. What's that been like?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it just comes to being in the right place at the right time. I think I've been, there's an element of good fortune and good luck, kind of being paired with some really strong programs. And, I definitely have looked back and seen sort of the trajectory of my coaching and been, like, wow, like I'm pretty lucky. Like I've only really gotten to experience, some of these top programs. And, in a lot of ways, like that's a great thing because you avoid, maybe some of the challenges that other programs have. But, no one is free of challenges, right? You just trade your problems up for better ones, and when you're in contention for, if you're at St. Paul's and you're contending for Henley every year, when you're at Cal and you're expected to win the IRA every year, like, those are challenges nonetheless. They're good challenges to have, but, I think it's definitely, it's been fun to have to deal with those and sort of, figure out how to attack those problems versus, hey, we have nothing and we're starting from the ground up, which can be very rewarding in its own right too. Like I tell people, like, I don't rank, the successes I've had at some of these programs differently, right? Like, when I was at St. Paul's, I was working with the J15 and J16 boats and typically like the B and C boats, right? So there's pretty far down in the ranks, a lot of young kids. And, I remember winning this random little regatta, the Bedford Regatta. It's like 1,000-meter race with the J15B crew. My second year of coaching over there, and like when they won that thing, like that was more exciting to me than any race I had won in college. And like I would still rank that up there with some of the victories that we've had at Princeton or Cal or Syracuse. Like, you're always sort of ranking or sort of not ranking, but you're actually just sort of assessing your success based on like what does this program need, right? And what's their barometer for a successful race or a successful season. So yeah, I've been super lucky to be able to work with such good programs. I always felt like I wanted to coach. That was, to me, coming, even when I was in high school. I remember, my senior year, our high school coach had actually left the school my senior year to go pursue a master's degree. And so we actually didn't have a coach for a good chunk of the year throughout the fall and the winter. And so, in the fall, I grabbed a bunch of the guys who were, kind of on my team. And I said, hey, we're going to go row for Mercer, the club team. Like, we're going to go, we have to get training. We have to get coaching. So we went and did that. And then in the winter, we were just doing sort of indoor training at the high school. And I just went online and just Googled like rowing training program and just how do you make a rowing, training plan. And I just spent time in the library as a 17-year-old, just coming up with a training program that we all did that winter. And so I always knew that like I liked that kind of stuff. And I felt like when I finished my rowing career, like that was definitely going to be a big priority for me, was figure out how to be a coach in some capacity, how to be a contributor in any way to a successful program. I always hoped that it would lead me back to Princeton because that was just such an emotional connection for me. But I also was definitely open to, hey, wherever, whenever, right? Like Syracuse was the first one that really took a chance on me. And, I had applied to a lot of places up to that point, and, a lot of the answers were, hey, you don't have enough experience, like keep working. So I was very lucky that Dave Reichman up there gave me that opportunity, and then, let me run with it too. Right. So I think it's just being in the right place, the right time with the right people. I think the people have been key to all of this too.
Yeah, and I'm sure those like the mentorship opportunities just through osmosis of like being there in those rooms with, coaches who will again have those, have that experience of building a program and being a part of top, top 10, if not even top 5 type programs. Like I think just exposure to that, just through osmosis, you probably picked up so many different things that have expedited your, coaching knowledge, right? Like, so again, I think that's very, very unique. And then, kind of stacking all that on top of a career at, for the Princeton Lightweights, right? Like, another very, very established rowing program, right? Like, competitive, top of the top program. So with that, like, let's leverage your expertise to, to help, dive into some fun topics and chat a little bit of rowing here, right? I think like, again, your unique perspective is going to be really helpful as we kind of think about like, okay, like for the people listening, where it's again, it's coaches, it's athletes, it's parents, it's all these different people who are all, kind of, hearing this first 20 minutes and being like, okay, like being a part of programs that again are ultra successful, and your role in recruiting and bringing athletes, and you're just being around these kinds of athletes. I think again, there's some stuff that we can really kind of take away that can be really helpful for people. But with that, like or talk a little bit about like, okay, and you can draw from your own experience as a high school athlete, for for your program as a high school athlete, but also then your college career, and then also now as a coach. But like Division I rowing, right, at that level. And again, we'll dive more specifically into like the recruiting side of it. But like, what is it as an like what are coaches looking for in terms of like, okay, like as these are the characteristics, these are the things that athletes have as high school athletes that are things that me as a coach are attracted to from a recruiting standpoint. Like those are the kind of guys I want on my team. Those are the intangibles or the tangibles, tangibles meaning like your rowing stats, right? Your ergs and stuff like that. Like, but dive into that. Like, what do you guys, like, what do you look for? What are things that you've observed where it's like, okay, like these are things that really make athletes successful at the college level?
Yeah, I think probably I could boil that down into maybe 2 main buckets. And the first one, and it's very important, is they have to love rowing training. And I think I used to say, oh, they have to love rowing, right? But I actually have amended that recently and said they have to love rowing training, right? Because, yeah, people can love rowing and they can love, sort of the more poetic aspects of it, right? Like I love, being on the water in the sunrise, or, I love the feeling when a boat gets going like this. That's awesome. I think still our sport is 95% just pure training and grinding. And so I like people who like that element of it, right? I look back on my rowing and I think, the stuff that I remember the most from my rowing is not necessarily, the body of water I was rowing on, the races that I won or lost. Like I just remember some good hard training sessions, whether we're out on the lake here, just, ripping 3 milers in the fall, or we're in, the erg room doing a 5x1500 on a Saturday morning and it's 10 degrees outside. Like that kind of stuff is what I remember the most from my rowing career. And I think that's the kind of stuff that matters the most, is like, yeah, if you are all about like that side of the sport, like I love competing with my teammates. I love competing with myself. I love the grind. I love thinking about how I can add more training. I love thinking about how I can be better at some element of my stroke. Like if that's the kind of stuff that gets you excited, the racing and the results and the satisfaction that comes from that will flow from that, right? If you start thinking ahead and saying like, oh, I love rowing because I love beating people, I love winning, right? Like that's an end result of you got to love the training to do that, you know? So I think a lot of people, nowadays would say, hey, I have a dream of winning this race, or like, hey, I really want it, right? You just got to want it, and what separates people is not the desire to do, to win. It's the desire to do the work to win. And so I like, when I talk to recruits, I'm always trying to figure out like, how's training going? And if they talk in sort of very glowing, like animated terms, like, oh yeah, like I just crushed this erg workout. Like we're out there in pairs, we're doing this, we're doing X, Y, and Z. Like, give me all the details. Like I love that stuff. Like I love, hearing what kind of workouts you're doing. I love knowing, I really blew up on this workout because I was pushing the pace on this interval, and like give me more detail, because that's the kind of stuff that really does matter in our sport. It is a training based sport, and training versus competition, it's always going to be in favor of that training stuff. So I think that's a key piece is you've got to love rowing training, and rowing specific training is helpful, right? Like there's definitely a place for cross training, but you got to love the erg. You got to love being on the water and getting in some hard miles there. I think the other main bucket.
Before you even get to that, like that right there, like I love that. That is like literally like in many ways like the essence of this podcast. Like it just, I love like being just again, like I had this conversation literally with an athlete, a few weeks earlier this week, and it's like immerse yourself in the training side of it, the training like, hey, like learning how to just, and again, like many ways you learn it by doing it and all these different things, but like as a walk-on, right, a guy who never rode in high school but just kind of came to college and was addicted to, hey, like these guys are beating me, like how can I start to try to catch up and this and that. Like the erg is very it was something that I latched onto, and I'm sure you're seeing that at incredibly higher, high levels, where it's like these dudes are just addicted to that feeling of putting in the work. Like, yeah. Again, I didn't want to like that to me is one of my favorite conversations. We're going to circle back around to that, but yeah, didn't mean to interrupt, but I love that.
No, and that's great. And like, just sort of a quick aside, like on the walk-on element too, like I think a lot of the DNA of our team is really helped by the fact that we still do run a novice walk-on program at Princeton. And we run, 5/8s. And, a lot of the guys, sort of in that 4th and 5th 8 group right now were actually guys who learned to row and took their first strokes here at Princeton. And like, just sort of the energy and the enthusiasm and just that attitude that those guys bring to the squad, like, is just so, I think it's so key, because they're coming into college and they're willing to try something new. That is very rare nowadays. A lot of kids are like, hey, I do not want to put myself in a compromising position. I don't like not being good at something. I'm going to steer clear. But, these guys come in and they're like, yep, I'm going to be bad at this. I don't care. They actually start getting good at it. And then that's kind of the upward pressure that helps lift all of our boats too. Like we're doing, sort of our Crash P, which is our big end of season 2K on Saturday. And, I just talking to a couple of the walk-on guys who, are now in their 2nd or 3rd year of rowing. It's just like remarkable to think of kind of where they were at last year or the year before, just starting out, just trying to get a score on the board. And now they're actually like, okay, like I see where guys in that 3V were last year. Like, what do I need to do to get there? Like, okay, I'm going to have a plan, and this is what I've got, sort of, lined up for my piece. And it's just so awesome to see people just like totally bought into what we do here and just pushing that work ethic and that grind for the whole group.
Oh, that's all. And like one of the things I say is like rooted in training, meaning like your like the why behind what you do in this sport is driven by like being rooted in like, again, like that feeling and that response that you get when you're on the erg and grinding, or you're side by side with another boat. And it's like, hey, like, win at all costs kind of feeling like, again, like you're just addicted to that feeling. And, I think again that's a super powerful piece of advice because you've seen it, right? Like you've seen athletes who are operating at that level where it's like again, like they're rooted in just hey, like this is a grind sport, and I'm going to figure out a way to really just accept the fact that like this is what we do, and I'm going to go as hard as I can in different ways. And I think having walk-ons and things like that, like the reason I love like talking about walk-ons is mostly because of, and again, you see this with probably guys that you recruit and stuff like that. It's not just you had to row coming in or you had to start your first strokes in college, but it's like the reason I can see it so much is number one, I was there, right? Like I was a walk-on, but it's like there's just this level of excitement that they have where it's like everything is like brand new, and it's like, oh, like I just have to outwork this person, like and I can start to like beat them pretty quickly, like and it's just this level of excitement that I think helps keep them attached to the sport in a different way all 4 years. And again, high school rowers can still make that a reality as well, right? They can still have that same kind of passion for what they do and the training. And so again, it's not just the walk-on side of things, but it's like again, like I think someone like you who's seeing that, where it's like, are these people rooted in training and having those conversations with recruits? Like, absolutely love it. We'll circle back around to that one as well. But I know you had another, right? Like, so what are other things that you see really make athletes successful at that level?
Yeah, I think the other major thing is, guys who just love the element of a team sport. And I think, just being a good teammate is one of our like core non-negotiables. It's so funny, like having seen, thankfully not often, but having seen the impact over my years of, one or two guys that are just a little more selfish or just a little bit less bought into the whole team concept. It can really throw some sand in the gears of your operation, right? And I think, having a group of talented individuals who are also selfless individuals is the recipe for a good season and a good team, right? And I think that I say good season because it needs reinforcement every year, right? Your team always is turning over, right? You're graduating the senior class, bringing in a freshman class. That means that, let's say 10 people walked out the door, 10 people walked in the door. That's kind of a swing of 20 people. And so the culture, has to be reinforced and sort of reestablished every year. And that selflessness and that, being a good teammate ethos is something that we really preach a lot. And at every stop in my coaching career, we've preached a lot.
How do you identify like things like in terms of like, is this someone who, like in a conversation or what you're learning from high school, like for high school athletes or people who are listening to this, it's like, okay, like, you know, are there ways that you can kind of like identify like, okay, like this sounds like someone who works, pretty, is pretty selfless in their actions and is someone who's going to be a good culture fit. Like, are there things that you listen for in phone conversations and things like that? Like, just out of curiosity, because as an intangible thing, right, it's a little bit different than like, okay, this person just loves training. Like, are there things that you seek out or look for or can tell in their actions that can better demonstrate that they're going to be a good culture fit?
Yeah, it's the little things when you're having a conversation with a guy and, maybe unprompted, they start talking about, hey, like guys on my team are PRing and like, yeah, I hit my PR, but like we also had, 7 out of 9 guys from last year's varsity also hit PRs and, showing a little bit of enthusiasm for what's going on around them. Guys who, typically we're going to talk to a lot of prospects who might be in their first boat at a program. But, again, if they're unprompted, starting to talk about, hey, like the 3V is crushing it, or hey, we have this new group of novices and like I've been working with them to try to get them up to speed. Like just little things like that can sometimes give you a glimpse into, what might this guy be like in our squad. And I think it's tough because, when you're looking to get recruited, if you're a high schooler, you do need to be a little selfish at times. You got to look out for yourself and your individual fitness and make sure that you're doing the right things to set yourself up. Because, ultimately when you go to the next level of your rowing, you're not going to go with your whole team, right? You're going to oftentimes, go alone. Or maybe there's someone else there. But You have to be a little selfish, I'd say, but majority selfless, right? And I think we notice when, you're part of a successful program and, a coach can kind of single you out and say like, yeah, there's somebody that is a really key piece of this operation, right? Hey, we're going to really miss them when they're gone. Like that's the kind of stuff that makes you think like, okay, like this person has a very positive impact on the people around them. And I think about it, I sometimes tell the analogy or just the example to my guys, like, when you walk up to the magnet board before practice and you see, okay, I'm in an 8, here's the other 7 or 8 guys around me. You have some opinion of that boat, right? You'll be like, okay, like, oh, this is going to be a good boat today. Or, we've all been there. You walk up and you're like, we'll see how this will go. That's a human response. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you take it in stride. I ask guys like, are you going to be one of those magnets on the board where people see you and you're like, oh, sweet, I get to row with Kevin today. Like, I know that boat's going to be like rock solid set. Like we're going to have a great row, like that kind of stuff, like be that type of person versus like, oh, like so-and-so's in the boat. I hope his head's in, today. I hope he's having a good day. Right. I think that's the kind of selfless things and being a good teammate, that being a good teammate entails.
Yeah, I love that, and again, that's something that everyone can relate to, right? Where it's like you look at the board and it's like, oh, like I got like I got this guy in the boathouse in the boat, or but again, like framing that in a positive way, and kind of being like, okay, like this is going to be, we this is our boat today, like let's make the best of it, right? Let's build these guys up. Maybe it's a newer athlete, let's build them up rather than be like, oh, our fate is, certain because they're in our boat. Like, no, like making the best out of that situation and bringing them along with you. No, I think that those are both like just for everyone listening, like running that back and just like listening to like, okay, like you couple those two things rooted in training or, again, like just being, rowing training, being your, kind of inner core, your being, and then also being a selfless teammate. Like you couple those two things together. Again, like, you can speak to this, but like what coach wouldn't want those two characteristics in an athlete? Like that's a very powerful way to think about it. And with that, like talking about, okay, like Princeton, right? Like, one of the premier, rowing programs, out there, right? Like, but also coupling that with a school that is very academically rigorous, very challenging to get into, one of the top end, again, just academic or universities, and couple that with rowing programs. Like in your experience, both as an athlete and then now as a coach and recruiting, like, or, doing the recruiting and all these different things, like what would be your, what are things that like you look for in a high school athlete that maybe are a little bit more tangible, meaning like, not or tangible, both athletically, academically, like what's an athlete or a student athlete that pops up on your radar? Like, what do they have to have? Like, again, just broadly speaking.
That's a good question. And I'll start with the academic piece first, because we haven't really touched on that yet. But at Princeton, that's a huge piece of your overall experience, right? Being a student athlete, student and athlete are kind of on the same level. I think of it as not priority 1 or 2. It's just two sides of the same, coin. And it's like you're a student and you're an athlete, and, there is no hierarchy there. But for us, like, obviously, we have some pretty strong, rankings in sort of the U.S. News, the Forbes, like all that stuff, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Like we're happy to be, number 1 in a lot of those columns. But I think, we try to peel that back and understand, when you see why that is, the undergraduate focus at Princeton, right? We only have 5,000 undergrads versus 2,000 grad students. So majority of the resources are focused on the undergrad teaching and learning experience, right? That's very different than a lot of our competitors where maybe you've got 6,000, 7,000 undergrads, but 15,000 graduate students in the med school, the business school, law school. We don't have any of those professional programs. So, almost all of our resources are directed into like you as the 18 to 22-year-old. And, that kind of informs a little bit the type of person that thrives at Princeton, right? At Princeton, you're going to get really challenged and pushed outside your comfort zone academically. It's not a place where you can just kind of float under the radar, do your prereqs, tick the boxes, and get your diploma at the end of 4 years, right? You're going to be pushed because you're going to have to take a very wide breadth of classes. You're not going to be able to avoid some things, like you're going to take a writing seminar. You've got to do, science and lab science. You've got to do, philosophy and sort of humanities-based stuff. You've also got to do a fair amount of independent work. You got to write 2 junior papers, which are, 20 to 30 page works in your junior year. And then you've got to follow that up with a senior thesis in your final year, which could be, 70 to 100 pages. And you're going to be pretty independent on that, but working closely with, professors who are at the top of their fields, advising you along the way. So you're going to get challenged, and it's not a place where, hey, I just want to do the school part just to tick a box and get my degree and then go work, right? When you come to Princeton, knowing that academically, I'm going to get the best teaching and I'm going to get some of the best advising, means that you're going to have to be all in on that, right? You're not just going to come here and just say, hey, I went there, but I don't remember any of my classes. Like, I remember almost all of my professors, over my time at Princeton, and still have good relationships with many of them. Eric Sorensen, who's a organic chemistry professor, he comes down to the boathouse, several times a semester and just checks in on the rowing team. And, he remembered me. I saw him last fall, and it had been 10 years since I had last seen him. And he's like, Jason, it's awesome. You're back. I saw that you were coaching again. Like, that's the level of, interaction that you get with the educational component here. It's, it can be a little daunting, but I would also say there's so much support, and the resources here are so top notch that you're going to be successful. And admissions knows that, hey, if you're here at Princeton, you're capable of doing the work. And that's very reassuring, especially in the times where you feel maybe you're a little under the gun, or you feel like, oh man, like there's a lot of stuff going on in my life. This place is designed for you to be successful, but it's also designed to push you. And that's kind of how we look at the rowing too, right? We think of our rowing program and what we ask of the team and what we do on a daily basis. Hey, you wouldn't be recruited here and you wouldn't be on this team if we didn't think that you were capable of doing the work and capable of pushing your boundaries to a new level. And that's kind of, I think that's one goal of the rowing training is the physiological stuff, right? We've got to do certain amounts of volume, certain amounts of intensity, but the psychological part of our training is key too, right? Guys have breakthrough moments, particularly the young guys when they get started, like they're doing things that they really didn't think were possible. And all of a sudden they're staring down, the sheet and saying like, wow, like I just did something that was well beyond sort of my expectations. But I wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't been pushed in this way.
Yeah. Is that so are these again, from you talk about the academic piece, right? Like obviously that's a massive component where it's like, if you don't have the grades, you probably, again, like as fast as you are rowing wise, it's just going to be a very challenging time even getting in, right? Even kind of crossing that barrier, right? If you're not someone who is academically proficient, again, it always starts there. And then what's in terms of just the rowing piece of things, okay, top end program, right? Like every athlete, I'm sure, right from the jump of, hey, you know what, I'm thinking about rowing in college, Princeton's going to be one of the first things that pops up, right? One of the first things they're searching for. And you as a coach with the other coaches, your job, part of that is sifting through that pool, that massive amount or pool of athletes. what is part of that filtering process for you guys? Like, obviously, yeah, like the erg's going to be a massive component to that, right? That's, a standard across all rowing programs, right? And you can talk a little bit about that if you want, right? Like, but where does that journey begin when you're looking at a pool that is so wide of athletes who would dream about rowing at Princeton, and it's your job as a coach to kind of start to funnel through that and see, like, who are the guys that I want to kind of go to that next layer of conversation with? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, well, firstly, we definitely encourage, anyone who's interested in the slightest in Princeton, in any college, email coaches, fill out questionnaires. Our goal, and, I think we're pretty compliant on this, but we try to reply to everyone who fills out our questionnaire and emails us. And just let them know kind of, hey, like, here's kind of the standards we're looking for, here's some more information about the school. I'd say for us, 620 is a good round number for people just to have as like a compass point in their training for heavyweight male. And then obviously that's kind of a starting point for the conversation. And when we get down to it, the recruiting class is going to have, quite a few guys, who are much faster than that. Ideally we're going to have a couple guys in the 6-minute range, handful of guys in the 6:08 to 6:12 range. And then we'll have a handful of guys in that 6:15 and up range, perhaps. But I think the key is wherever guys are at, seeing progress is important too, right? Like, a guy who says, yeah, I dropped to 6:20 or 6:19, and then we don't really see much else from them for quite a time. And I think you've talked about this before, but like just hitting 619.9 just because like, hey, that was my goal and I hit it and now I'm going to take a rest. Like that's not someone who loves rowing training. That's someone who, just hit a score just to hit a score, right? And so I also think, if you're 2K testing every 2 weeks just because you feel like I have to get this number, actually that's not why we give the number out there, right? We give the number to let you know, like, this is roughly the fitness that it takes to be competitive. And that's kind of why we tell guys, hey, 620 in your junior, senior year of high school, we know that that's going to set you up to have a successful college rowing career, right? That's really the fact of the matter. Guys who come in with a good level of training, who can hit that kind of score in high school, I think they're going to have a pretty, solid transition to the level of work that we do. And they're going to get a lot faster. So I think the other thing, when we look at guys filling out the forms or questionnaires or emailing us, certainly the frame is important to an extent. We're not recruiting, our team is not full of 16 and 17-year-olds, right? Like our top boats are going to have, 19 to 23-year-olds. And so we're actually trying to project, hey, kid fills out the form at 16, what kind of build are they going to have? And what kind of fitness can we expect from them when they're 20, 21, 22 years old? Because that's when we're going to need them to be hitting their stride most, right? And so sometimes it's a matter of like, okay, this guy is just hitting his growth spurt and he's, kind of tall and lanky, but we think we can, put some size on him just through the training program over the course of a few years. Sometimes it's a guy who actually is on the shorter side and just has good fitness and seems to continue to get faster every time he trains. And, you sort of project that out and you're like, hey, like, this guy might not be the biggest guy, but I can tell he fits all the other criteria and he's going to be, a strong erg and a strong oarsman in our program. So we want him. I used to be a little bit more of a stickler, I think, when it came to height. Like I used to think, hey, below a certain amount, I just don't see it happening. But in our varsity 8 here at Princeton last year, we had both Marcus Shute was in the 5 seat. He's probably 6'1" on a good day on tippy toes. Zach Vackel was in the bow. I think he's 6 foot if he really stretches it. And those guys are absolute killers. They're studs. And those guys have been huge in the success of our team. So I think, on the height side, look, if you're a total assassin and you just love training and you're fit and you can row long enough, like we'll make it work, right? And plenty of guys like that have been successful at the highest level. It's not just 6'6", guys who go on to have good college rowing careers.
Yeah. One of the things that you said I thought was incredibly valuable is number one, like all that is like for people listening, like just really good stuff in there, like that they can again just give themselves, an objective to kind of think about. And one of the things that I really love that you said was like, okay, like yes, 620 is a number that kind of is a foot in the door, but is it about just hitting that number, or is this is a tell to us that you are able to come in here and actually be able to withstand the work of a top end Division 1 college program? Like that's, I think, an interesting way to think about it, where, or in a very valuable way. It's, hey, like it's not just hitting the number and being done, but like to us, right, to you guys and the other coaches, like it's like, oh, like this is an athlete who I feel can come in here and be able to withstand the volume that we're doing, the number of sessions, the all these other things, and actually has the chance to be successful, both, just in this environment. Like I think that's a big piece where it's like, it's again, like it's not just like the SATs, hey, get this number and you're in, right? Which I can't stand that kind of like, frank, like, saying and stuff like that. Like I think it's so much deeper than that. It's like, but what it does tell coaches like yourself, like, oh, like this guy's clearly shown enough work where they can come in here and accept the challenges that are thrown at them as a freshman at this level, right? Does that kind of make sense? Is that?
Yeah, and it's a good way to think about it because, like, hey, the number, like recruiting standards and stuff like that, like that's not there just because we're gatekeeping it from everyone. It's just like, hey, like we know what it takes to be successful at our level, and that's we want our athletes to come in and have good experiences and be able to take on those challenges, right? And if you're hitting the right metrics on the erg and you're in a program where hey, you're getting some quality coaching. You do not have to be a finished product, but it just shows us that, hey, like this is a guy that we can work with. And, more importantly, if you're showing that improvement, like this is someone that is going to be excited to take that next step. Right. And I can't tell you how many times, when we're building our recruiting list, you have sort of a rough ranking in your head of like, okay, these are our top guys, these are our middle guys, these are sort of the, bottom end guys. And, those so-called bottom end guys end up, just taking off, their freshman or sophomore year. And you're like, damn, okay. Like this is great. But sometimes that's just exactly the kind of person that is just so motivated to train and, is so far from their potential that, hey, they're going to prove you right when you recruit them.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, that's awesome. Like again, like everyone, yeah, that's just again for athletes listening, coaches listening, parents, whatever, right? Like there's so much good stuff in there. And I think a question I have on that front, right? One of my questions on that front is like, okay, like, and you highlighted this before, but you just referenced it now, right? Kind of coming full circle back to, just training and falling in love with and developing a passion for rowing training. And talk about this from your experience, but also what you've observed and coached for athletes at that level or at the college level, and maybe even some of the things that athletes that you work with now. And okay, like, is there ways that you can extrapolate that and be able to, or that high school athletes could even start to think about, right? Like in terms of like just better adhering to rowing training and enjoying rowing training and actually putting in the work to be able to do that. Like, were there anything that you would, that you did when you were a high school athlete to better position you to go off and row for, for Princeton, like, or the athletes that you coach where it's like, oh, this guy's, waking up at 5 a.m. and putting in an extra workout or this or that, like anything like that athletes at that level could probably take away from what you see as guys who are successful at the college level?
So I actually really like this question. I think for me, I've sort of come around to this perspective, having tried a few other things and maybe seen where it didn't necessarily get me where I wanted to go. I think at times in my college rowing career and maybe early on in my coaching career, I think I kind of had this idea in my head that, hey, look, like if you can just row well enough, you're going to be able to beat people. Like there's some magical technique and there's some sort of like perfect efficiency that if I just hit all the right buttons, like that's going to be so much speed, right? And that's going to take me to the next level. And I think, to my own detriment, I don't think I trained probably at the level that I wish I had when I was in college. And then some of my early crews, I perhaps didn't give them the training dose that they needed to make that next step. And I've, fully come around on that and realized like, hey, at the end of the day, fitness matters, right? The erg does kind of float, it really makes a difference. And the fact of the matter is like, you can row at any given level, right? Like, hey, I'm technically a proficient rower or I'm technically weak in one area without changing the quality of your rowing. Like, I don't know if a technical change is going to make you faster or not in the moment. But I do know that if you got 5 seconds faster on your erg and you didn't change your technique at all, you have become a better rower. Like you have become a more useful rower for no change in your quality of rowing whatsoever, just because now you can produce more power. And so I think that was something that, finally clicked to me after seeing like, hey, this is really what goes into a winning program and sort of, fast crews. Like the training is sometimes it's more than you think, right? And so kind of my advice would be to anyone in high school or even, folks in college now who are going through their training, like, there's no substitute and there is no, cure for kind of missed training or ineffective training, right? Like you can row as well as you want and somebody bigger and stronger or just straight up fitter and tougher than you is probably going to take your lunch, right? And you can say like, oh, we rowed so well, they were just better than us. And eventually you're going to get frustrated and tired of that. And you're just going to have to train. Right. And that was like, I remember learning that lesson, a little bit in high school. And then now I've just really fully come around to that. A lot of times athletes will say, like, oh, I missed a ton of training over winter break. I was really busy. Are there any workouts I can do to kind of, make up for lost time? Or is there anything I can do to kind of, get back on track? And, the answer is, go build a time machine, right? That's my only real advice. Like mistraining is mistraining and you're not going to have a chance to make it up. You can do your best to kind of optimize going forward, right? They say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. So you can always do better going forward, but nobody should delude themselves into thinking that rowing is anything but a power endurance sport.
Oh man, this resonates so well with the conversation I was having a few days ago with an athlete. But it's like I just told him like, you want to get to a point where, and again, just coming back to the passion for training and rowing specific training, like you want to get to a point where it's like kind of thinking about the time machine and this and that, like missing time. Like to me, it's like, hey, like there is no like figure out a way to get your work in, right? Yep. Like, and if you have to scale it back because you're running, around and you're traveling on vacation or this, like, yes, scale it back, but you want to get to a point where the training means something so valuable to you where it's like you have trouble going to sleep without knowing that like you got something in that day. Like I was having that conversation with an athlete a couple of days, like, and you saying that there, I think just speaks so much louder too with your experience and being around the athletes that you are around on a daily basis. Like make it challenging, like develop such an adherence and such an appreciation for the machine, for the erg, for whatever, even cross training, all these different things, like develop such an appreciation for the value of that you have trouble going to sleep until you got some work in, right? I'm not saying stay up till midnight and get your work in, right? Live to fight another day and to get it done tomorrow. But like, you want that to be like, oh man, I feel guilty. Like I haven't gotten that, like, again, within context and, whatever, like you want that kind of feeling, right? Like I gotta get something in today. Right. And is that kind of similar?
Yeah. And I think all of it comes with the caveat that, you don't want to go so far in that direction that, hey, like you actually become, you end up becoming very fragile, right? You feel like, oh, if I didn't get my training in, like everything is ruined, or I didn't get the perfect session in. I think I'm off, and now I can't psychologically get up for the next session. I think about it as like, it's like brushing your teeth, right? It's like if you went to bed, you didn't brush your teeth, you'd be like, it doesn't feel quite right. And it just becomes a habit where you're like, I just have to do this, right? Like every day, or with whatever's on the training program, like I have to train, right? And if a day goes by where I was supposed to and I don't, it feels wrong, right? And I think that building that mindset. Some people are born with it. Some people have to actually actively create that mindset. And the easiest way to do it is just to commit to a short chunk of time doing that, right? And you say like, hey, over this month, like I'm going to be really consistent with, getting my extra work in, or I'm just going to make sure that, hey, like I do all these little things right and schedule my time better so I can always have time to train. I think, for myself, I found like when I was in high school, I had to find time, beyond just what my high school program called for, because I wanted to do greater things. I wanted to row at a better program. I wanted to get recruited and do some stuff beyond high school. So you have to find time to do extra ergs, or get another way to get training in, right? Like my junior year, we didn't offer rowing in the fall season. And by that point, I had done just one season a year, freshman and sophomore. And I was like, I really want to start rowing year round because I want to take this to another level. But, I had no ride. Like I didn't have a driver's license and I couldn't get to the boathouse to train. So I basically convinced a friend to sign up for it as well so that they could be my ride. And it's like, hey, like I need you for me, right? For both of us. And then, you're going in and you're doing ergs in your lunch break, and people are like, what the heck are you doing? And you come back to lunch and you're like sweaty, and people are like, why did you do that? And they're not going to understand, and they're going to think that you have kind of like a little something off. But that's okay, because, nothing good was ever really achieved by being just sort of a balanced, normal lifestyle, particularly if you're trying to do something that other people aren't doing.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. Like that's some great stuff in there for people. And again, I just love that philosophy. And again, coming from people like yourself, who are seeing it every day, and these athletes who kind of exemplify that, I think is massive. With that, a couple of things, right? As we kind of, want to be conscious of, you guys, as you guys get into the thick of, getting the season or getting some strokes in. But I feel like one of the things that I really love, and one of the things that first, basically was like, hey, like, Jason's someone I want to bring on and stuff like that. It's like, I love the way that you guys as coaches and your team, and even you in your prior coaching stints, like you leverage social media and leverage content and like a brand that, like, obviously your coaching account, which I think was something that was probably ahead of, maybe like now it's something where every coach has one, right? I didn't have one when I was a coach, 3 years ago. I didn't have a specific coaching account, right? Like, but I was running the team's account at that time. Yep. But now you see every coach kind of has both. And you, I know, have had one, right? Where you first came onto my radar was when you're at Syracuse and putting out some content and things like that. Tiger Heavy's in a brand, as its own brand is, again, like it's an account that everyone knows about and is on and active and seen, you guys rowing on the canal earlier today or earlier this week. Like, talk about, like, for you, like, where did that begin? Because I think as we shift out from, high school athletes and what they can learn, but like just coaches at the college level or even the high school level, like, where did that come about? Where did that materialize? What has been the value from that? Was that something like a hobby turned into something, a valuable piece to your recruiting? Was that something that just you were conscious right from the beginning of, oh, this is just another way to show our brand? I know the teams that you were on prior to Princeton even have, very well ran brands on social media. But again, I feel like that's something that I really wanted to kind of spend a few minutes chatting about as well. Like, where do you see the value in that piece to your coaching?
So I forget where I heard this first, but I think it was a friend who did some type of marketing, and they once told me, and they said, like, to this generation, meaning high school athletes and even people our age, they said, listen, like Instagram is the internet, right? Like that's where you go first. It's like the first thing that a lot of people click on. Like when you open your phone, you're probably not opening your Safari browser and just clicking random web links. Like you go on Instagram or you go on Twitter and you scroll and you see stuff. And that's just kind of how our generation and younger generations use the internet now. And so like, what people see on an Instagram profile is a lot of times their first impression of you as a program or sort of the program that you represent. And so it started like when I was at Syracuse initially, we were doing the same thing, like running the team's Instagram account and posting stuff there. And then, starting to use that to actually message prospective recruits was quite helpful as well, because, you actually had an account that had a pretty big following and it wasn't your own personal account. So you could actually start to message people, and then they would check out your profile, and then that might lead to a further recruiting conversation. I started doing my own personal one probably right around COVID, mostly because I was super bored. And then I was like, okay, like there's really not a ton of content that we can post on the team account right now. So I'm just going to, make a couple videos and, just have something else, something different to post as well. And then that eventually kind of morphed into like, okay, can I use this as like a front door for our program and sort of have people, interact with me and then kind of see, okay, here's what the program is, and here are some of the other things that they were talking about. So definitely use that a lot as, like a recruiting tool, just like posting things that are kind of interesting or give some insight into the team, posting some personal stuff if it matters. Like when, I've had some job changes, so I've, done that. Definitely using it to message prospective recruits. I think it's been probably the best use of that, because sometimes you're just trying to get a hold of somebody and you just have no idea how to contact them. You don't have their phone number, you don't have their email. Yeah, sometimes you can get that from their coach or from another database, but a lot of times what's quicker and easier is you just you fire them a message on Instagram, give them a follow, they follow you back and want to engage, then great, like you just saved yourself a ton of work. If not, yeah, no sweat, you can still find ways to get in contact with them through traditional means too. But yeah, I mean, I get a fair share of messages in my inbox, many of them because I've reached out to prospects before, and some of them just unsolicited, like, hey, like I followed you a while ago, have some questions, like, can we get in touch? So I think that's just been helpful to have another avenue to go about the recruiting, especially because that's just where, that's where a lot of kids spend their time. You're going to be scrolling, and if you're going to be scrolling and seeing a lot of stuff on your feed, might as well throw some of my stuff in there too, So that's been really cool. I did use TikTok once upon a time, and then I actually got some good posts going on there. But then you know what they say, like, don't get high on your own supply. Like TikTok was way too addictive. I was wasting my own time on that. So I still have an account up there. I don't really use it anymore. Something about that algorithm is just even more of a brain suck than Instagram is currently. So I mainly stick to Insta.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. Like I have the an at 1,000 TikTok as well, but I just literally copy and paste whatever video I make on Instagram. I literally just put it in there, and like it's got it does all right. So but I don't look at any videos. I don't even do it on Instagram really. Like I try not to like get too invested in like all that stuff, because I don't want to be it to take all my time away. But it's funny you say that, like with the TikTok as well. It's like I'm just quickly log on, put it up, get off right immediately. That's yeah.
if I'm doing like a more intense session of just like, all right, I'm looking up results. I've got a bunch of names of kids I want to contact. Like I'll do all the Instagram stuff on like my laptop, on my desktop, like try to like actually remove it from just the small device in front of my
Yeah.
face. That way it doesn't screw up my screen time stats too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fun. I think, it's definitely not something that, is it going to tip the scales and change your fortunes as a program? Who knows? I think it has helped build brand awareness and, some of the maybe second order, third order effects that come from that, are impossible to quantify. I do know that like, hey, when I was at Syracuse, like I definitely piloted a lot of that stuff and got that to a point. And then the SID at Syracuse, Olivia Coiro, who's awesome, she has sort of taken over on a lot of that, and I think they still have one of the best social media games out there. So shout out to Liv for doing a great job with their accounts. And then I think here like it just kind of helps keep people in the loop about what's going on with the team. And like you said, you saw that we were rowing on the canal, and probably 1,000 people saw that. So it's like, oh, cool, like people know kind of what we're up to, and I didn't even have to explicitly state that.
Yeah. And I think that's like the reason, like I even like, number one, I always say like in the sport of rowing, like postable content, like you're literally living in it, right? Like sunrises, boats moving very fast or just moving very subtly through boathouses and teams and people happy and being on the water. Like you literally have postable content. Like it's the easiest sport to get out content on. And it's like, I think that's one of the things I always tell people where it's like, hey, like if you're looking for a way to indirectly message your recruits, take a picture of a sunrise and tell them about that particular session. And now they're going to be fired up seeing that. It's like, oh, like sunrise, and then like a little bit about like today's practice, how they do this workout, this and that, like as a simple way to get started. But my question to you on that front before we start to close things out, but like just general advice that you would give to a college coach who is trying to better leverage Instagram. Maybe it's frequency of posting or connecting with recruits, right? It could be kind of either or both, whatever. But like, what would be your advice to kind of getting them or for people who maybe have the account but they don't even use it, don't use it at all, both from a recruiting standpoint or from a content standpoint? What would be your just general advice for them?
I think and these are rules that like I need to follow even better. These are sort of goals for myself that I'm trying to do better with these days. But I think trying to post something on the story mostly daily is great, just because that's kind of an easy low barrier to entry. Like you don't even need to throw up any text on some of that stuff. Like that's just as simple as like going throughout your day. Oh, I see something cool, or oh, there's a boat down in slings. Snap a pic, throw it up. Keeps people in the loop with what you're doing, and just kind of reminds them that you're there too. Just the way the algorithm works, like you keep clicking on someone's story, they keep showing up higher in your feed, and then you end up seeing the same person over and over, and repetition is the key with all that. The posting and the reels and that kind of stuff, I think I'm trying to do better and get at least one out a week going forward, just to kind of give a little bit of a recap of some stuff for notables. And there's always something notable going on, even in slow times of the year. The trick is just, being open enough to see it and to explain it to a group, right? Like this week, this one's kind of easy because we've had a couple unique things going on, right? We're rowing on the canal. Like that's been really fun. I've been out there breaking ice on the lake. That's always good. We're going to do our crash peas on Sunday or Saturday. So we're going to have a lot of content from that. People will see their erg room set up and everyone doing their 2Ks. But yeah, I mean, during quieter times of the year, like during Christmas break or during the summer break, definitely a little less content sometimes. And we can often take that as like, hey, like I'm on vacation as a coach, or I'm not really checking my stuff. But that's a great time to post like evergreen content, right? Just a picture of the boathouse and just, hey, always a great day in Princeton or something, just ways just to keep people in the loop and stay at the forefront of their minds. From a recruiting side, I would say like, I've tried to keep my messages to recruits pretty short and pretty succinct, usually just like, hey, so-and-so, nice job getting this result at this regatta. My name's Jason. I work at Princeton. Um, you know, Here's like a quick 2 sentence blurb about what we're doing. Have you ever thought about, studying or rowing at Princeton? If so, let me know. We can get in touch. Right. I try to not, bombard them initially and just sort of let them know like, hey, you caught my eye. Would love to get in touch more if you'd like. Here's a way to get started. And then we'll typically move the conversation over to, email or something like that, where we can actually send a little bit more stuff for them to peruse, or get a call set up if that's kind of where we're at in the process. But I think shots on goal. I send tons of messages through that, and probably less than half of them get seen or answered. But that's great. It only takes one to get the ball rolling on a conversation. And there's a lot of times that I do it, and yeah, you get far along in the process, and it turns out, this person probably isn't going to be right for us, either academically or athletically or whatever it may be. But I don't want to assume that right early on. When I'm recruiting, it's like everyone's a viable candidate until we find out otherwise, right? It's like I'm going to assume the best. I'm not going to say, oh, this guy probably doesn't have the grades, or like, oh, like this guy, like, why was he so slow on the erg? I'm not going to bother. It's like, if they're in sort of the ballpark for what we might want, I think it's a good idea to just, hey, I reached out to them. I did my diligence, and if they don't want to engage or they're not interested in Princeton, then that's fine, right? But we want to make sure that we're taking plenty of shots on goal.
Yeah, I love that, and that's a great, just two tangible things that coaches can take away. And for any of the athletes still listening, like, it's hey, like, don't be afraid to create an athlete specific account, because there are coaches who are going to be able to find you and see like, oh, like, like it's a great kind of way to create that dynamic and that communication, like just two-way communication, like at least initiate it. So Jason, with that, I know I want to make sure that we're conscious of your time, but last bits, like as we close things out, last bits of piece of advice that you will give to athletes who aspire to compete at that level, at the Princeton level, right? Like, just this could be athletically, academically, whatever it may be, but just like any last little pieces before we close things out and you can get on with your with the rest of your day. But last little bits that athletes at home can take with them before we close things out.
So I'll give an interesting quote or sort of reference to start this last bit. The actor Timothy Chalamet. So he just got some award at the Screen Actors Guild sometime this week. And his acceptance speech was kind of interesting. And I don't watch this at all. I just saw it, a clip on Instagram, which shows how important that is. But he basically said something to the effect of, like, hey, like, I got this award. This is awesome. And I know people usually come up here and like thank their family and friends, and I will do that. But like, I'm really in this business because I want to be great. Like, I'm in this business because I want to be remembered as a legend in the acting industry. And it was just very interesting to me because you don't normally hear that kind of stuff, especially at an acceptance speech or sort of at, someone in the acting world. But it just got me thinking, like, let's make it cool to want the best for yourself, right? Like, let's make it, make trying your best and going out on a limb and challenging yourself, like, let's support that. I think there oftentimes can be, among high schoolers, maybe if it's a little cliquey, even in some college teams, it can be a little bit like a crabs in the bucket, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm trying to do better for myself and I want to bring this program to a new level. And a lot of people can sometimes be a bit, they can feel a little threatened by that, right? People around you can sometimes be, hey, like, I don't know, like, are you sure you want to be doing that? Or why are you working out so much? Just tone it down. And it's okay to want the best for yourself and to be, to be a little bit, unhinged, I would say, particularly in your training when you're young and you're really trying to get to the next level. So is a very roundabout way of me saying, to an audience, that includes like high school athletes looking to get recruited. Don't be afraid to be perceived as different, right? Don't be afraid to do the things that other people won't do, even if, you don't necessarily feel like that's the popular thing in the moment. And that can be, that can apply to many things, right? That can be in how you train, right? It's like, hey, like I'm always getting in extras. Right now, I'm the only person on my team who does that, but it's not going to stop me, right? And in fact, rather than, call those people out, I'm going to call them in and try to get them to follow me. I'm not going to be, pulled that way. I'm going to pull other people my way. It can apply to things in terms of the culture of the team, right? Like, don't be afraid to want success and excellence and, hold people to that standard. I think that's a really important quality for an athlete at any level, but starts young, right? When you feel like you're empowered to do that at an early age, then that's how you create this environment of great teammates and great leadership. And paired that with good rowing training, then you have a recipe for something pretty successful.
Yeah. Wow. All right. That is again, this I love that, and that's something that everyone should oh, I love that. With that, Jason, like let's wrap things up. This was a blast. I had so much fun chatting with you. And again, this is definitely something that we could dive into all these in a round two at a later stage. But I think that was a great way to close things out, where it's just, hey, don't be afraid to be a little bit, to pursue what you're striving for in whatever realm that may be, right? Whether it's being an athlete, a coach, whatever it may be, professional, who cares, right? Like, it's just, kind of that philosophy, I think, is something that everyone can take with them. With that, where can people find, obviously, this is an easy question, right? Your social media and Princeton and all that, people who are interested in reaching out. Let's close things out with that. And we'll prep for round two here at a later date, maybe sometime after spring season or something like that. But yeah, where can people find you?
Definitely. My Instagram handle is at Jason Elefant Coach. So my full name and then coach. You can also find me on the website at Princeton. You've got my phone numbers on there. It's my cell. My email address, jelefant@princeton.edu. I actually got to keep my email address when I was a student. So that was really easy. Anyone who wants to get in touch, feel free. The door's always open.
Awesome. Jason, this was a blast. Good luck as you go out there and continue to chop some mice on the lake. And good luck to the team as you guys start to get your strokes in and prep for the spring. And appreciate you taking the time to come on. This is a blast.
Kevin, thanks a ton, man. This was really fun.